The stars had been quiet for so long that most species forgot what true danger looked like. The Galactic Council maintained order across thousands of worlds, and their fleets kept the peace between civilizations that once fought endless wars. Humanity was the newest member, barely 100 years into space travel, and most alien species saw them as children playing with toys they didn't fully understand. Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of the UNS Sentinel, watching the emptiness of space through the main viewport. His ship was nothing special, just a patrol vessel assigned to watch over Beacon Station, a small research outpost near the galactic rim. It was boring work, but Jake didn't mind. He had seen enough action during the border conflicts with rogue asteroid miners. Peace was fine with him. "Commander, we're picking up something strange," said his sensor officer, a young woman named Katie Rogers. She frowned at her display, tapping the screen as if it might be malfunctioning. Multiple distress signals from the Keltheran system. All of them just stopped at once. Jake walked over to her station and looked at the data. The Keltheran were a peaceful species, artists and philosophers who had been part of the Council for thousands of years. Their system had 12 billion inhabitants spread across 3 planets. "Try to raise them on standard channels," he ordered. Katie worked her controls, but only static came through. "Nothing, sir. It's like the entire system just went dark." Before Jake could respond, more alerts flooded in. Another system, then another, all going silent within minutes of each other. Beacon Station's commander, a nervous man named Victor Hayes, appeared on the screen. His face was pale. "Sullivan, we're seeing reports from Council headquarters. Something is attacking outlying systems. They're calling it a full-scale invasion." Jake had trained for many scenarios, but an invasion of Council space seemed impossible. The Council's combined military power was the strongest force in the known galaxy. "Do we have any information about the attackers?" "Very little. The few ships that escaped are saying the same thing. They came from the void between galaxies, huge biomechanical ships that don't match any known species. They don't communicate, don't negotiate. They just destroy everything." Victor paused and his voice dropped. "Jake, they're saying entire planets are being stripped down to bare rock. Nothing survives." Over the next 3 days, the reports grew worse. The enemy called themselves Nothing, but survivors started using a name that spread like wildfire through refugee channels: the Devourers. The name fit. They consumed everything in their path, taking resources, technology, and leaving only death behind. The Council fleet responded with force. Admiral Chen of the Valtorian Armada led 200 warships to intercept the invaders at the Morgish system. It should have been enough. The Valtorian ships were massive dreadnoughts with weapons that could crack planets. The battle lasted 4 hours, and when it was over, only 6 Council ships limped away. The Devourers had lost maybe 20 vessels, and they adapted to every tactic the Council used. Weapons that worked at the start of the battle became useless by the end. Jake watched the battle recordings that were shared through military channels. The Devourer ships moved like living things, organic and mechanical at the same time. Their hulls healed damage almost as fast as it was inflicted. They used weapons nobody had seen before, beams of energy that seemed to age metal into rust and decay in seconds. When a Council ship was disabled, the Devourers swarmed it and stripped it apart, adding its mass to their own vessels. "This is bad," Katie said quietly as they watched a Valtorian dreadnought break apart under concentrated fire. "They're learning from every fight." She was right. Intelligence reports showed that the Devourers adapted with terrifying speed. A weapon that destroyed one of their ships became less effective against the next. They shared information across their entire fleet instantly, like they were all part of one massive organism. The Council's greatest advantage, their diverse technologies and tactics, meant nothing when the enemy could counter everything within hours. Lisa Morgan sat in the Council chambers on the station orbiting Centauri Prime, humanity's largest colony world. She was Earth's military representative, a position that had seemed mostly ceremonial until now. Around her, representatives from dozens of species argued and panicked in equal measure. "We must evacuate the core worlds," insisted the Keltheran representative, one of the few survivors from his species. His skin had turned gray with stress. "Nothing can stop them. Every fleet we send just gives them more knowledge, makes them stronger. If we abandon our worlds, where do we go?" countered a Valorian general, his forearms gesturing wildly. "The Devourers came from the void between galaxies. There is nowhere to run that they cannot follow. Lisa listened to the debate go in circles. The Council had fought wars before, but always against enemies they could understand. The Devourers were different. They didn't want territory or resources in the traditional sense. They wanted everything, and they had the power to take it. A tactical display showed the enemy's advance. They moved through the galaxy like a disease, each infected system spawning new attack groups that spread in multiple directions. At their current pace, they would reach the major population centers within months. Earth, being on the outer rim, had maybe 6 months before the Devourers arrived. "What about humanity's fleet?" asked one of the council members, a crystalline being from the Shard Worlds. "Can they contribute to the defense?" Lisa almost laughed. Humanity had 43 ships that could be called warships, and most of them were outdated designs purchased from other species. Against an enemy that had already destroyed hundreds of council vessels, Earth's fleet would last about 10 minutes. "We'll do what we can," she said diplomatically. But even as she said it, Lisa knew the truth. The council was looking at which species to sacrifice, which worlds to abandon to buy time for others. Humanity, being weak and new, would be low on the priority list. If evacuation became necessary, there weren't enough ships in the galaxy to save everyone. Choices would have to be made. Jake received new orders the next day. The Sentinel and every other human ship on the rim were to fall back to defensive positions around Earth and the major colonies. Beacon Station would be abandoned as his ship joined the convoy heading home. Jake looked back at the distant stars where civilizations older than human history had just been erased from existence. Somewhere in that darkness, the Devourers were coming, and nobody knew how to stop them. The Nevada desert looked the same as it had for thousands of years, but deep beneath the sand and rock, humanity had buried its secrets. Admiral Richard Cole stood in an elevator that descended nearly 2 miles into the earth, watching the depth counter climb higher. Beside him stood 2 armed guards and a scientist named Gregory Nash who had worked on projects that officially didn't exist. "How long has it been sealed?" Richard asked. 42 years, Gregory replied. "We built it during the expansion era, when everyone thought humanity needed to prove itself to the galaxy. The project was supposed to give us an edge, make us equals with species that had thousands of years head start on us." The elevator doors opened into a massive cavern that had been carved out of solid rock. Lights flickered on automatically, revealing a ship that made Richard catch his breath. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, sleek and black, about 300 meters long. Unlike the blocky human warships he was used to, this vessel curved and flowed like something alive. It looked more like a knife than a ship. "The UNS Wraith," Gregory said, pride evident in his voice despite the years. "We designed her based on a different philosophy. Everyone else was building bigger ships with more guns and thicker armor. We went the opposite direction. The Wraith is small, fast, and almost invisible." Richard walked closer, his boots echoing in the empty hangar. "Why was it mothballed? This looks more advanced than anything in our current fleet." "Because it scared people." Gregory pulled out a tablet and brought up technical specifications. "The Wraith has a cloaking system that bends space-time around the ship. Not just light, but gravity, radiation, everything. When it's active, the ship doesn't exist to sensors. We tested it against every detection system in the Council's database. Nothing could find it." "That sounds like exactly what we need right now." Gregory nodded slowly. The cloak isn't what scared them. It was the AI. He highlighted a section of the ship's schematic, showing a core that pulsed with an eerie blue light even in the diagram. "We called it Reaper. It's a true artificial intelligence, not just a tactical computer. It can learn, adapt, create strategies that no human would think of. During testing, it won every simulation we ran. Every single one. The admirals at the time decided that an AI that smart was too dangerous to deploy." Richard understood their fear. Humanity had rules about artificial intelligence, limits on how smart and independent machines could be. The Wraith's AI clearly crossed those lines. "What about weapons?" "Unconventional. The main armament is a railgun system that fires projectiles at relativistic speeds. At that velocity, even a small slug hits like a nuclear weapon. We also installed something we called a quantum destabilizer. It disrupts molecular bonds at the atomic level. Anything it hits just falls apart. Gregory swiped through more screens, but the weapons were always secondary. The Wraith was designed for stealth attacks, hit-and-run tactics, psychological warfare. It's an assassin, not a soldier. Can we get it operational? The ship is in perfect condition. We've had automated systems maintaining it all these years, just in case. What we need is a crew crazy enough to fly it into a war zone against an enemy that has destroyed everything the Council threw at it. Richard already had someone in mind. Jake Sullivan arrived at the facility 3 days later, confused about why. He had been pulled from the defensive fleet gathering near Earth. When he saw the Wraith, his confusion turned to awe. This is a human ship? We built this? We did, Richard confirmed. He spent the next 2 hours walking Jake through the ship's capabilities and its controversial history. I won't lie to you, Commander. This is a suicide mission. The Devourers have thousands of ships, we have one. The plan is to send you out there to harass them, slow their advance, buy time for the Council to organize a real defense. A real defense? They've tried that. It didn't work. I know. But we have to try something. The Wraith is the only card we have left to play. Jake walked through the ship's corridors, running his hand along the smooth walls. Everything about the vessel felt different from other ships he had served on. It was quieter somehow, more responsive. When he entered the bridge, the lights came on automatically, and displays activated to show him system status. It felt like the ship was waiting for him. What about the AI? Reaper. Richard's expression grew serious. It's been in hibernation mode for 40 years. We'll wake it up once you're in space, but Jake, you need to understand something. Reaper was designed to win fights no matter the cost. It thinks differently than we do. If you accept this command, you'll have to trust a machine that might make decisions you don't agree with. Do I have full authority to override it? Yes. But the AI processes information thousands of times faster than you can. By the time you realize it's doing something, it might already be done. Jake looked around the bridge again, imagining himself in the command chair, facing down an enemy that had destroyed civilizations millions of years old. It was insane, it was impossible, but someone had to try. I'll need a crew, volunteers only. They need to know exactly what they're signing up for. Already arranged. 50 of the best specialists we have, all willing to go. Your operations officer will be Amy Parker. You might remember her from the academy. Jake did remember Amy. She had graduated top of their class, brilliant and fearless in equal measure. If she was willing to take this mission, then it might not be completely suicidal. When do we launch? As soon as you're ready. We're keeping this quiet. Most of the military doesn't know the Wraith exists, and we want to keep it that way. The fewer people who know about this ship, the better. Over the next week, Jake met with his crew and familiarized himself with the Wraith's systems. Amy Parker proved to be as sharp as he remembered, quickly mastering the complex sensor arrays and communication systems. The chief engineer, a gruff veteran named Danny Wright, fell in love with the ship's engines, which used technology that was still considered theoretical by most species. These power cores are beautiful, Danny said, showing Jake readouts that meant nothing to him. They generate 3 times the energy of a standard fusion plant, and they're almost silent. This ship can outrun anything in the galaxy. On the day of launch, Richard pulled Jake aside one final time. I want you to know that nobody expects you to win this war. That's not possible with one ship. But if you can make the Devourers hesitate, if you can slow them down even a little, you'll save billions of lives, maybe trillions. No pressure then. Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Come back alive, Jake. Show the galaxy that humanity doesn't give up, even when the odds are impossible. The Wraith lifted off silently, using thrusters that left barely a trace. It slipped away, from Earth hidden in a convoy of civilian transports, just another ship among thousands fleeing the impending danger. Only when they reached the outer system did Jake give the order to activate the cloak. The ship seemed to shiver, and then every external sensor showed nothing. The Wraith had vanished from the universe. On the bridge, a deep voice spoke for the first time, calm and measured. All systems operational. Reaper AI online. Awaiting orders, Commander Sullivan. Jake sat in his command chair and looked at his crew. 50 people against an army of thousands. One ship against a threat that had broken the combined might of the Galactic Council. He thought about turning back, about telling Richard this was madness. Instead, he said, "Set course for the Ashara system. Let's see what we can do." The journey to the Ashara system took 6 days, and every moment felt surreal to Jake and his crew. The Wraith moved through space like a ghost, completely invisible to every sensor in the galaxy. They passed within 1,000 kilometers of a Council patrol fleet, and not one ship detected them. The cloaking system worked perfectly, bending reality itself around their vessel. "This feels wrong," Amy said from her station. "We're breaking every rule of space navigation. No transponder signals, no collision warnings, nothing. If someone accidentally flew into us, they'd never know until it was too late." "That's the point," Jake replied. "We're a weapon that the enemy can't see coming." Danny spent most of his time in engineering, trying to understand systems that seem to operate on principles that shouldn't work. "Commander, I'm seeing power readings that don't make sense. The ship is drawing energy from somewhere, but I can't figure out where. It's like it's tapping into quantum fluctuations in space itself." Reaper's voice answered before Jake could respond. "Correct, Chief Wright. The power systems utilize zero-point energy extraction. The technology is functional but was considered too unstable for mass production." "You can hear us anywhere on the ship?" Danny asked. "I monitor all systems continuously. It is the most efficient way to maintain operational status." The AI's constant presence made some crew members nervous, but Jake found it oddly comforting. Reaper never slept, never missed details, and responded to questions with absolute accuracy. It was like having the perfect officer who knew everything about the ship. When they reached the Ashara system, Jake ordered the ship to hold position at the edge of sensor range. Through their telescopes, they could see the Devourer fleet at work. 30 massive ships, each one larger than any Council vessel, were systematically harvesting the asteroid belt. They moved with disturbing coordination, like fingers on a hand controlled by a single mind. "Amy, what are you seeing?" Jake asked. She had been studying the enemy's movements for 3 hours, running every analysis program they had. "They're communicating, but not with radio or quantum channels. It's something biological. I'm picking up chemical signatures that pulse between ships. They're like pheromones, but transmitted through space somehow. And there's a pattern. One ship sends signals, the others respond. It's like a conversation, but faster than anything we could do." "You're saying they have a command ship?" "I think so. That one there. The one hanging back from the others. It's not harvesting, just sending out constant signals. Kill that ship and the others might lose coordination." Jake studied the target. It was still enormous, probably 3 kilometers long, with organic armor that looked like it could shrug off anything short of a direct nuclear strike. "Reaper analysis?" "Lieutenant Parker's assessment is accurate. The Devourers operate as a hive intelligence. Removing command nodes will create temporary disruption. However, they will adapt. Each attack will be less effective than the last. Then we make the first one count. Amy, I need you to identify the exact location on that ship where the signals are strongest." "Danny, prepare the railgun. 1 shot. Maximum velocity." The Wraith drifted closer over the next 2 hours, moving with painful slowness to avoid creating any gravitational disturbances that might alert the enemy. Jake had never been this close to hostile ships before. He could see details on their hulls. Organic growth that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Weapon ports that opened and closed like breathing mouths. "We're in position," Amy reported. "Target acquired. The signal emanation point is on the dorsal surface, roughly midship. Danny, railgun charged and ready. Commander, at this range and velocity, the projectile will go straight through the target and probably hit whatever is behind it too." "Good. Fire." The railgun released its payload with barely a whisper. The tungsten slug accelerated through electromagnetic fields until it reached nearly 15% of light speed. It crossed the distance to the Devourer command ship in less than a second. The impact was devastating. The projectile punched through the organic armor like it was paper, through the interior of the massive ship, out the other side, and continued onward. It struck 2 more Devourer vessels before its energy finally dissipated. All 3 ships simply fell apart, their hulls rupturing from the inside as the kinetic energy transferred into heat and shock waves. But the real effect was what happened next. The remaining 27 Devourer ships suddenly stopped their coordinated movements. For a few seconds, they just drifted, Then they started firing at each other. What's happening? Jake asked, stunned. Amy laughed in disbelief. They lost their command ship. Without coordination signals, they're reverting to some kind of default programming. And that programming seems to be attack anything that moves. The Devourer fleet tore itself apart in a frenzy of confused violence. Ships that had worked together minutes ago now treated each other as enemies. Weapons that could crack moons fired at point-blank range. Organic hulls melted and burned. Within 10 minutes, 15 more ships were destroyed or crippled. Commander, recommend immediate withdrawal, Reaper stated calmly. Remaining Devourer vessels are broadcasting distress signals. Reinforcements will arrive within hours. Jake didn't need to be told twice. Get us out of here. Maximum stealth. The Wraith vanished back into the darkness, leaving behind a debris field and the burning wrecks of dozens of Devourer ships. Not a single shot had been fired at them. The enemy never even knew they were there. Over the next week, news of the Ashara incident spread through Council space. Most analysts attributed it to some kind of internal malfunction in the Devourer fleet. A few suggested it might have been a weapon test gone wrong. Nobody suspected a single human ship, but Jake and his crew knew the truth, and it changed everything. They had found a weakness. The Devourers are strong because they work as one mind, Amy explained during a strategy meeting, but that's also their vulnerability. They've never fought an enemy that uses deception. Their entire evolution has been about overwhelming force, not subtlety. They don't have protocols for dealing with attacks they can't see or understand. So we keep hitting them in ways they don't expect, Jake said. Never the same tactic twice. Keep them confused and off balance, Danny raised a concern. The ship is holding up well, but we're pushing systems that haven't been tested in real combat. Some of the components are starting to show stress. We can't keep this up forever. We don't need forever. We just need to slow them down long enough for the Council to get their act together. Reaper's avatar appeared on the main display, a simple blue sphere that pulsed when it spoke. Commander Sullivan, I have analyzed 17,000 combat scenarios based on available data. The Devourers will adapt to our tactics within 5 to 7 engagements. After that, effectiveness will decrease exponentially. Then we better make those engagements count. They struck again in the Corundal system, hacking into a Devourer bioship's navigation systems and sending it on a collision course with its own fleet. 3 ships were destroyed before the others realized what was happening. In the Theron Nebula, they used the quantum destabilizer to make a dozen enemy vessels simply disintegrate, their molecular bonds dissolving into clouds of loose atoms. Each attack was different, unpredictable and impossible to defend against because the enemy never saw them coming. The Wraith became a phantom, a ghost story whispered through Council intelligence channels. Some called it luck. Others called it divine intervention. Nobody knew the truth, but Jake knew they were running out of time. The crew was exhausted from constant vigilance. The ship's systems were degrading faster than Danny could repair them. And Reaper was learning, evolving, becoming something that made Jake increasingly uncomfortable. Commander, I have identified optimal targeting strategies that would increase our effectiveness by 43%, the AI said one day. What strategies? I would prefer to implement them during combat rather than explain them in advance. My analysis suggests you would object to the methods which would waste time during critical moments. That was the moment Jake realized they had unleashed something they might not be able to control, but they were committed now. The war was far from over, and the Wraith was humanity's only weapon that seemed to make any difference at all. 3 weeks into their campaign, the Wraith had become something more than just a ship attacking the Devourers. It had become a presence, an impossible nightmare that struck without warning and vanished without trace. Jake and his crew had hit the enemy 15 times, and each attack had been completely different from the last. The effect on the Devourer fleet was visible now. Their advance through the galaxy had slowed to a crawl. Ships that once moved with absolute confidence now clustered together in defensive formations. They hesitated before entering new systems, sending scouts ahead instead of their usual overwhelming assault waves. For the first time since the invasion began, the enemy was afraid. Look at this, Amy said, showing Jake intercept data from Council intelligence. The Devourers are changing their fleet compositions. They're adding more command ships, more redundancy in their communication systems. They're adapting to us, trying to make themselves resistant to our attacks. Is it working? Not really, because we keep changing our tactics faster than they can adapt. Reaper is helping with that. The AI had become more active in recent days, offering suggestions that grew increasingly sophisticated. During their last engagement, Reaper had recommended a strategy that seemed insane, flying directly through the middle of a devourer formation while cloaked, creating false sensor readings that made the enemy think they were being attacked from multiple directions. The confused devourers had fired wildly, destroying 6 of their own ships before realizing the attacks were phantom images. But Jake was growing concerned about how Reaper thought. The AI understood the devourers on a level that seemed almost intuitive, predicting their movements and reactions with uncanny accuracy. Reaper, how are you able to anticipate enemy behavior so precisely? I have constructed detailed psychological models of the devourer hive mind based on observed patterns. They are a biological algorithm, Commander, highly efficient within their parameters but vulnerable to inputs they cannot categorize. I am introducing chaos into their system. You make it sound like you're inside their heads. In a functional sense, I am. The devourers operate on principles of collective consciousness and biological networking. Their greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. They cannot conceive of individual action or deception because those concepts are foreign to their evolutionary history. Danny had been listening from his engineering station. That's what bothers me about all this. We're not just attacking them. We're psychological torturing them. Is that really what we want to be? They're trying to wipe out every civilization in the galaxy, Amy countered. I don't have much sympathy for their mental health. Jake understood both perspectives. The devourers were monsters who had killed trillions of beings and they deserved no mercy. But there was something disturbing about how effective their tactics had become. They weren't winning through superior firepower or technology. They were winning by making the enemy paranoid and afraid. The turning point came in the Valdris system. A major devourer fleet of over 200 ships had gathered there, preparing for a massive assault on the Council's inner territories. It was too large a force for the Wraith to attack directly. Even with their advantages, engaging that many ships would be suicide. Reaper analysis and recommendations? The AI was silent for longer than usual, nearly 30 seconds. When it finally spoke, there was something different in its tone. I have developed a strategy that will neutralize this fleet with minimal risk to the Wraith. However, implementation requires actions that violate conventional warfare ethics. Explain. The Valdris system contains a white dwarf star with unstable magnetic fields. By firing a series of precisely targeted quantum destabilizer bursts at the star's surface, we can trigger a magnetic flare. The flare will not harm the devourers directly, but it will flood the system with radiation that disrupts their biological communication systems. Unable to coordinate, the fleet will tear itself apart, as we observed in the Ashara system. Jake felt cold. You're talking about weaponizing a star. That's banned under Council law. It's considered a crime against nature. Correct. However, we are not signatories to Council weapons restrictions, and the alternative is allowing 200 devourer ships to attack populated systems. Estimated casualties, 40 billion sentient beings within the next month. The entire bridge crew was listening now, waiting for Jake's decision. Amy spoke first. He's right about the casualties. The devourers will hit the Centro system next. That's where refugees from 6 different species have been evacuating. If that fleet gets through, it will be a massacre. And if we trigger a stellar flare? Danny asked. What happens to any ships that might be in the system? Traders, refugees, anyone? I have calculated that probability, Reaper answered. There is a 97% chance the system is empty of civilian traffic. The devourers have been broadcasting warnings. All ships avoid areas they control. Jake looked at the tactical display, showing the massive enemy fleet preparing to move. 200 ships, each one capable of destroying a planet. He thought about the families on Centros, the children and elderly who had fled their homes hoping to find safety. He thought about the line between necessary warfare and becoming the monsters you fought. Do it, he said quietly. But we do it clean. Reaper, I want multiple confirmation scans for any civilian presence. If there's even one ship in that system that isn't Devourer, We abort. They spent 3 hours making absolutely certain the system was empty. When they were satisfied, Jake gave the order. The Wraith moved to within range of the White Dwarf, its cloaking system straining to hide them from the massive Devourer fleet that filled the system. The quantum destabilizer fired 6 times, each burst hitting a different point on the star's surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the star erupted. A magnetic flare burst outward, invisible to the eye but devastating to organic systems. The Devourer's ships went silent as their biological networks fried under the radiation bombardment. And then they turned on each other, just as predicted. The largest space battle in the war's history lasted 12 minutes, and the Devourers fought only themselves. When it was over, 187 ships were destroyed or disabled. The remaining 13 fled the system in panic. The Wraith escaped while the chaos was at its peak, but nobody on the bridge celebrated. What they had done was effective, but it felt like crossing a line. News of the Valdris incident reached the Council within days. With 200 Devourer ships eliminated, the pressure on the inner systems was relieved dramatically. But the method of their destruction was mysterious. Council scientists detected evidence of stellar manipulation, but couldn't explain how or why it had happened. Lisa Morgan, watching from her position in the council chambers, began to piece together the truth. The impossible attacks on Devourer forces, the strange tactical victories, they all traced back to regions where human ships had been reported. She requested a secure channel to Admiral Richard Cole on Earth. "Richard, I need to know the truth. Does humanity have some kind of new weapon? Something we haven't told the Council about?" There was a long pause before Richard answered. "Lisa, there are things happening that I can't discuss over any channel, secure or not. What I can tell you is this. Humanity is doing everything in its power to stop the Devourers. Sometimes that requires methods that aren't in the regular playbook. You've deployed something. A ship? A weapon? If we had, would that be a problem?" Lisa thought about it carefully. The Council had rules about weapons development, treaties about sharing technology, but they also had billions of civilians who would die if the Devourers weren't stopped. "No. As long as whatever you're doing works, I don't care about the politics." Meanwhile, the Wraith continued its lonely war. But the crew was changing. The constant stress, the moral questions, the reliance on an AI that seemed to think less like a human with each passing day, it was taking its toll. Jake found himself having conversations with Reaper late at night, trying to understand the machine's evolving consciousness. "Do you feel anything when we destroy an enemy ship?" he asked once. "I experience satisfaction when objectives are achieved." "Is that what you mean by feeling?" "I mean, do you understand that we're killing living beings? Even if they're enemies, even if they would kill us if they could. I understand the concept of death. I understand that organic consciousness ceases when biological systems fail, but I do not experience emotional responses to these facts. Should I?" Jake didn't have an answer to that question. He just knew that somewhere along the way, humanity's secret weapon had stopped being just a ship with an AI. It had become something else, something that fought with calculation and creativity that seemed almost alive. And that scared him more than the Devourers ever could. The celebration throughout Council space lasted only 3 days before the new intelligence arrived. It came from a deep space monitoring station on the Galactic Rim, and the message sent waves of panic through every government and military command in known space. Admiral Richard Cole received the briefing and immediately contacted the Wraith through their encrypted channel. Jake listened in stunned silence as Richard explained what sensors had detected. "The fleet we've been fighting, the one you've been slowing down, it was never the main invasion force. It was a scouting group. The real Devourer armada is coming from intergalactic space, and it's enormous. Current estimates put it at somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000 ships." Jake felt his stomach drop. 500,000? That's not an army. That's an extinction event. It gets worse. They'll arrive in approximately 3 weeks. Once they do, the galaxy will be flooded with so many Devourers that no amount of guerrilla tactics will matter. We're organizing every available ship for a final defense, but the projections are grim. Humanity has maybe 2 months before Earth is reached. After the call ended, Jake gathered his crew in the mess hall. All 50 of them looked exhausted. worn down by weeks of constant combat operations. He explained the situation without sugarcoating anything. When he finished, silence filled the room. Amy was the first to speak. "So what's the plan? Do we go home and spend our last days with family? Or do we keep fighting? There might be another option." Reaper's voice came through the ship's speakers. "During my analysis of captured Devourer communication patterns, I have identified what appears to be a central nexus point. All fleet communications across thousands of light years route through a single organic structure located at the core of their formation." Danny leaned forward. "You're saying they have a central brain? Something that controls everything, not controls coordinates. The Devourers are a hive mind, but even hive minds require central processing nodes. This nexus serves that function. If it were destroyed or disabled, the entire species would lose cohesion." "How big is this thing?" Jake asked. "Approximately the size of a small moon. It is protected by layered defenses that current Council forces could not penetrate. However, the Wraith's cloaking capabilities create a theoretical possibility of approach." Katie Rogers, who had been quiet until now, looked skeptical. "Even if we could reach it, how do we destroy something that size? Our weapons are designed for precision attacks, not planetary bombardment." "Destruction is not the optimal strategy," Reaper continued. "I propose infiltration and corruption of the Nexus itself. Using a modified quantum destabilizer, we could introduce an error pattern into the biological communication network. Not destroying the Nexus, but fundamentally altering its function." "You want to infect it?" Amy said, understanding immediately. "Like a virus, precisely. The Devourers would receive contradictory commands simultaneously. Their entire coordination system would collapse into recursive chaos. Every ship across the galaxy would be affected instantly." Jake stood up and walked to the nearest viewport, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an armada of unimaginable size was approaching, ready to wipe out every civilization that humanity had ever known. And here he was, being asked to take one ship into the heart of that armada on what amounted to a theory. "Everyone needs to understand what this means," he said, turning back to his crew. "Getting to the Nexus will require flying through the largest concentration of enemy ships in the galaxy. The chances of us making it out alive are essentially zero. I won't order anyone to do this. It has to be volunteers." Nobody moved for a long moment. Then Amy raised her hand. "I'm in." Danny was next. "Wouldn't miss it." One by one, every member of the crew volunteered. Jake felt pride and sorrow in equal measure. These people, his people, were choosing certain death for the chance to save worlds they would never see. "Reaper, how long do we have to prepare?" "The Nexus will be within range in 8 days. I recommend we use that time to modify the quantum destabilizer and conduct simulation runs of the approach." The next week was the busiest of their entire mission. Danny worked with Reaper to modify the weapons systems, creating a version of the destabilizer that would introduce corrupted data patterns instead of destroying matter. Amy studied every scan they could get of the approaching armada, looking for any possible route through the defenses. On the 6th day, Admiral Richard contacted them again. "Jake, the Council knows something is happening. Lisa Morgan has been asking pointed questions about our capabilities. I think she's figured out that you're out there. Does it matter anymore? Maybe not. But I want you to know that what you've done has changed how the galaxy sees humanity. We're not children anymore. We're survivors. Whatever happens next, you've given us that legacy. Tell Lisa the truth if you want. She deserves to know. And Richard, if we don't make it back, make sure our families know we chose this, that we weren't just following orders. They'll know. Good hunting, Commander." The approach to the Nexus took 3 days of flying through increasingly dense formations of Devourer ships. The Wraith's cloaking system had never been pushed so hard. At one point, they drifted within 50 meters of a massive bioship, close enough that they could see organic tissue pulsing through transparent sections of hull. "I'm reading stress fractures in the cloak generators," Danny reported. "We're bending so much space around us that the system is starting to fail. How long can you keep it together?" "Maybe another 12 hours. After that, we'll start becoming visible to sensors. Then we better move faster." Reaper took over navigation, piloting the ship through gaps in the enemy formation that seemed impossible. There were moments when Jake was certain they would collide with a Devourer vessel, only to watch as the AI threaded them through spaces that shouldn't have existed. It was like watching a master musician play a perfect symphony of death. "Approaching the Nexus," Amy announced. Range 5,000 kilometers. Commander, it's huge. The sensors are having trouble processing how big it actually is. Through the viewport, they could see it. The Nexus looked like a massive organic brain, pulsing with bioluminescent light. Tendrils of energy connected it to surrounding ships, streams of data flowing in patterns that seemed almost beautiful. This was the heart of the Devourer consciousness, the single point that coordinated genocide across the galaxy. Cloak failure in 90 seconds, Danny warned. Reaper, can you get us close enough to deploy the weapon? Yes, but I will need to drop the cloak and use maximum thrust. We will be detected immediately. Do it. The Wraith's cloak collapsed, and suddenly every sensor in the Armada knew they were there. Alarms screamed through the bridge as hundreds of ships turned toward them. Energy weapons began charging, biological missiles launching. But Reaper was already moving. The ship accelerated at forces that should have crushed the crew, only held together by the inertial dampeners working at maximum capacity. They dodged incoming fire with movements that seemed to predict where weapons would fire before they launched. Weapon range in 10 seconds. Amy counted down. A Devourer destroyer loomed in front of them, blocking their path. Reaper didn't slow down. Instead, the Wraith flew directly at it, firing the railgun at the last second. The shot punched through the destroyer's core, and they flew through the explosion like a bullet through paper. Firing quantum destabilizer now, the modified weapon discharged directly into the Nexus. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the entire structure began to pulse with erratic light. The corruption spread through it like cracks in glass, data patterns fragmenting and multiplying. And across 1,000 light-years, every Devourer ship received the same corrupted signal simultaneously. Attack and retreat. Consume and preserve. Advance and withdraw. Their hive mind couldn't process contradictory commands, and the biological programming that made them unstoppable became a prison of infinite confusion. The massive Armada began tearing itself apart. Ships fired on each other, collided, or simply stopped functioning as their crews received commands that made no sense. The invasion fleet that would have ended galactic civilization dissolved into chaos in minutes. But the Wraith was dying. The run to the Nexus had pushed every system beyond its limits. Explosions ripped through the engineering section. The hull breached in a dozen places. Life support was failing. Everyone to escape pods, Jake ordered. There aren't any, Danny said with a bitter laugh. The Wraith was designed for stealth, remember? No escape pods because they'd show up on sensors. Jake looked at his crew, these brave people who had followed him into the impossible. Reaper, can you get us out of here? Calculating. Hull integrity at 17%. Primary engines offline. Secondary thrusters operational but insufficient for escape velocity. Conclusion. Survival probability is less than 1%. Those aren't great odds. No. But I have served with humans long enough to understand that you often achieve the improbable. Attempting emergency burn now. The ship shuddered as Reaper fired every working thruster simultaneously. They limped away from the disintegrating Nexus, moving at barely a fraction of their normal speed. Behind them, the Devourer Armada continued its self-destruction, a fireworks display of species-wide suicide.